What if everything you thought you knew about Meghan Markle's role in the royal family was built on a lie? Not just whispers, not just rumors on social media, but a lie so bold, so carefully constructed, that even the Queen herself felt compelled to put it down in writing. Imagine that. Queen Elizabeth II, a woman of duty, discipline, and silence, breaking her own lifelong habit of keeping family matters private, to write a secret letter directly to Meghan Markle. Why? Because according to those close to the palace, Elizabeth knew the truth about Meghan's pregnancies. She knew the deception, and she feared what that deception would mean, not just for Meghan, not just for Harry, but for the monarchy itself. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Now, here's where things get even more unsettling. This letter, the Queen's final, private word on the matter, wasn't meant to see the light of day. It was kept buried, tucked away, guarded behind palace walls. But Kate Middleton, the future queen herself, has allegedly exposed it. And in doing so, she has blown open a truth that could shatter everything we thought we knew about the House of Windsor. But let me stop right there. Before we get ahead of ourselves, let me ask you something. Why does this story matter now? Why is this secret only surfacing in whispers, rumors, and fragments? And more importantly, what does it say about the royal family's endless war with Meghan Markle? Think about it. We're living in a time when the monarchy's grip on the public imagination has never been weaker. Charles sits on the throne, but public opinion fractures. Harry and Meghan wage their media battles from California. William and Kate try to hold the line, playing the part of modern royals, relatable yet dignified. And in the middle of it all is the shadow of Queen Elizabeth. The woman whose mere presence once kept the institution from splintering into pieces. Now imagine that in her final years, Elizabeth saw through Meghan. Imagine that she knew, beyond any doubt, that the pregnancies, those two symbolic events that tied Meghan to the monarchy's bloodline, were staged, fabricated, or manipulated. That Meghan never carried Archie. That Meghan never carried Lilibet. Imagine the implications of that. We're not just talking about family drama. We're talking about a direct challenge to the continuity of the monarchy itself. Because in a system where lineage is everything, a lie about birth is not just scandal, it's treasonous. And here's the kicker. Elizabeth, who reigned for 70 years, who weathered countless storms, didn't simply ignore this. She put pen to paper. She wrote to Meghan. She urged her to stop the deception, to stop the manipulation. And in doing so, she left behind the single most dangerous document of her reign. Are you starting to feel the weight of this? Picture the scene. The Queen, frail yet sharp-minded, sitting in her private quarters at Windsor Castle. Perhaps the soft hum of staff moving in the background. Perhaps the weight of history pressing on her shoulders. And in her hands, a fountain pen, an envelope, the royal seal. She isn't writing to a world leader, a prime minister, or a dignitary. She's writing to Meghan Markle. A woman who had walked into her family, claimed the spotlight, and, if the rumors were true, lied her way into the heart of the monarchy. But why now? Why is this letter resurfacing years after it was written? Because Kate Middleton, the one royal who has kept her silence longer than anyone else, may finally be done playing nice. For years, Kate has been painted as the dutiful wife, the smiling mother, the peacemaker. But behind those carefully staged photographs and charity events lies a woman who has seen it all, who has carried the burden of knowing truths the world wasn't ready to hear. And when Elizabeth passed, that burden grew heavier. Because suddenly, the last person who could contain the secret was gone. Kate, according to insiders, found herself holding the key to a truth that could burn Meghan's carefully constructed narrative to the ground. And perhaps, in the Queen's absence, Kate decided it was time to let the truth breathe. But let's pause. I can almost hear you asking, is this just another conspiracy theory? Another rumor in the endless tabloid machine? That's the dangerous beauty of royal secrets. They live in the space between truth and speculation, between whispers and headlines. And yet, consider this. The Queen, who lived through Diana's tragedy, who endured scandals from Charles and Camilla, who watched her own family unravel in public. Why would she break her silence? Why would she write a private letter at all, unless the stakes were unbearable? That's the question that haunts this story. And it's why Kate's alleged revelation feels less like gossip and more like destiny. Now, I want you to reflect for a moment. What if you were in Kate's shoes? Imagine holding a piece of paper in your hands, a letter written in the Queen's unmistakable script, confirming what the world had only dared to whisper. A letter that says, in essence, Meghan lied. She never carried Archie. She never carried Lilibet. And if she continues, she risks destroying the credibility of the monarchy itself. Would you burn that letter to protect the crown? Or would you expose it to protect the truth? That's the impossible choice Kate faced, and the choice she has allegedly made. And that's why you're here. Because the truth, once hidden in the Queen's handwriting, is now spilling out, piece by piece, word by word. But here's where the tension sharpens even further. If Meghan lied, as the letter suggests, then Harry, her husband, the Queen's beloved grandson, was either complicit in the lie or fooled by it. Both scenarios are devastating. Both scenarios carry consequences not just for the Sussexes, but for the entire monarchy. And both raise questions about just how far this deception went, and who else inside the palace knew. Was Charles aware? Did William suspect? Did palace doctors quietly play along, forced into silence by non-disclosure agreements and royal pressure? These are the threads we will unravel in this story. Because the Queen's final letter was not an isolated note. It was the spark to a wildfire that still rages today. But let me be clear. This isn't just about Meghan. This isn't just about Harry. This is about the survival of the monarchy in an age where truth and image collide like never before. And if Elizabeth's last private act was to call out the deception, then Kate's decision to reveal it is not just rebellion. It is revolution. So buckle in. Because over the next chapters, we're going to peel back every layer of this story. We'll trace Meghan's pregnancies, the contradictions, the rumors. We'll explore Kate's role as the silent witness. We'll uncover the emotional weight Elizabeth carried as she penned that letter. And we'll ask the hardest questions. Did Harry know? Did Meghan ever intend to come clean? And what happens now that the truth is out? But before we dive in, I want you to sit with this image one last time. The Queen of England, the most powerful woman in the world, sitting alone with her thoughts, writing a letter not to a world leader, but to Meghan Markle. Writing not about politics, not about diplomacy, but about a lie. A lie she feared could undo her family's legacy. And now, that letter is no longer hidden. Kate has opened the door. And once that door is open, there's no closing it. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Why would the Queen write to Meghan Markle in the first place? Think about it. This is Queen Elizabeth II we're talking about. A monarch who reigned for 70 years. A woman who sat on the throne through wars, recessions, scandals, and betrayals, yet never once felt the need to pick up a pen and privately confront a family member in writing. Elizabeth was the queen of understatement, the queen of silence. Her motto might as well have been, never complain, never explain. So what was so dangerous, so alarming, that it forced her to break her own lifelong rule? That's the question that draws us into this story, and it's where the trail begins. Because according to Palace Whispers, Elizabeth's letter to Meghan wasn't just a private note. It was a plea for honesty, a plea for restraint, and perhaps a plea to save the monarchy from implosion. Let's set the stage. It was 2018, the year Meghan married Harry, that the Queen first began noticing cracks in the fairy tale. On the surface, Meghan was everything the royal machine wanted: glamorous, charismatic, international. The wedding at Windsor Castle was a spectacle of unity. The cameras captured smiling crowds, gospel choirs, and a bride in Givenchy walking down the aisle. But behind the scenes, murmurs were already spreading among palace staff. Meghan was difficult, demanding, a disruptor in a family that thrived on routine and quiet obedience. And then came the pregnancy announcement. It should have been joyous news. A royal baby, a symbol of continuity, a bridge between the old world and the new. But even from the beginning, something about Meghan's pregnancy didn't add up. The timing seemed off. The palace announcements were vague. And Meghan's behavior, always in the spotlight, gave birth, no pun intended, to endless speculation. Have you ever noticed how every pregnancy tells its own story? Some women glow, some retreat, some struggle quietly. But Meghan's pregnancy told a different kind of story, one that seemed written more for the cameras than for the family. She cradled her bump at every public appearance. She leaned into the narrative of glowing motherhood, even as whispers grew louder that something was amiss. And those whispers? They didn't stop at gossip columns. They reached the Queen. Now, imagine Elizabeth hearing those rumors. This wasn't just about Meghan. This was about the crown. Because if Meghan's pregnancies were false or manipulated, then the monarchy's line of succession itself could be questioned. Archie wasn't just a baby. He was a potential prince. He was 8th in line to the throne. And Lilibet, born later, was 9th. In a monarchy, lineage isn't symbolic. It's everything. Without it, the crown loses legitimacy. And Elizabeth, who had devoted her entire life to preserving the institution, could not afford to ignore the possibility that the future of her bloodline rested on a lie. So what did she do? According to those close to her, Elizabeth did what she had always done when confronted with unbearable pressure. She turned to tradition. She turned to words. She turned to the quiet power of the written letter. Think about how extraordinary that is. This was a woman who rarely spoke out, who rarely revealed her personal thoughts, even to her own children. Charles often complained that his mother was distant, detached, emotionally unavailable. But with Meghan, she chose a different approach. She put her thoughts in writing, where they could not be denied, where they would last forever. And that's where the intrigue deepens. What exactly did Elizabeth write? We may never know the exact words, but palace insiders suggest the tone was unmistakable. It wasn't harsh. It wasn't cruel. It was firm. It was maternal. It was Elizabeth as both grandmother and monarch. She acknowledged the rumors. She expressed concern. And, most chillingly, she urged Meghan to stop. To stop pretending, to stop deceiving, to stop risking the very foundation of the monarchy. Now let's pause for a moment. Imagine being Meghan, receiving that letter. The most powerful woman in the world, the longest reigning monarch in British history, has just called you out, quietly, privately, but directly. How would you react? Would you crumble under the weight of her words? Or would you double down, determined to prove her wrong? That's the tension at the heart of this story. Because Meghan, by all accounts, didn't stop. She didn't retreat. If anything, she leaned harder into the narrative of her pregnancies. She showed up at public events in fitted dresses. She smiled for the cameras. She embraced the role of glowing, expectant mother. And every time she did, the Queen's words must have echoed louder in the background. But here's the question no one has answered. Why did the Queen put it in writing at all? Why not simply summon Meghan for a private conversation? Why not let aides handle it, as she had with countless other family scandals? Because Elizabeth knew this wasn't just about family. This was about history, and writing it down meant she was leaving a record that could not be spun, a record that could not be erased, a record that future generations could look back on and know the Queen knew. And here's where Kate Middleton enters the picture. Kate, the ever-watchful, ever-silent figure in the background. For years, she has been portrayed as the perfect royal wife, graceful, loyal, obedient. But behind that smile lies a steel spine. She has been at the center of every storm, quietly observing, quietly calculating. And when Elizabeth passed, Kate became one of the only people with access to her private papers. What she found there changed everything. But we're not there yet. First, let's go back to the Queen herself. Elizabeth was a woman of symbols. She understood the power of subtle gestures, the language of silence. But in this moment, she chose directness. She chose clarity. And in doing so, she broke her own rule. Never complain. Never explain. Except this time she did. And that's why this letter matters. Because it wasn't just the Queen's words. It was the Queen's acknowledgement. She knew Meghan's pregnancies were not what they seemed. She knew the deception. And she refused to let history write a false story without leaving her own warning behind. Now, I want to ask you directly. Do you believe Meghan would have ignored the Queen's letter? Do you believe she would have shrugged it off, pretending it was nothing? Or do you believe, deep down, that the letter haunted her? That every time she cradled her bump, every time she posed for cameras, she remembered Elizabeth's words? We may never know. But what we do know is this. Meghan did not change course. The narrative continued. Archie was born. Lilibet followed. And the Queen's letter remained hidden, locked away, unread by the world. Until Kate. Because Kate, unlike Elizabeth, is not afraid to let the world see. She has played her role for too long. She has watched as Meghan and Harry waged war against the monarchy from their California mansion. She has endured the Oprah interviews, the Netflix specials, the memoirs. And through it all, she has kept silent. But silence has its limits. And when Kate discovered the letter, she knew the world had to know. Now, ask yourself, why Kate? Why not Charles, the new king? Why not William, the direct heir? Why not even one of the Queen's closest advisors? Because Kate holds a unique position. She is the bridge between the monarchy's past and its future. She is both an outsider, like Meghan, and an insider, like William. She knows what it means to marry into the family. She knows what it means to be scrutinized, criticized, and judged. But unlike Meghan, she chose to bend, not break. And that choice has given her power. So when Kate exposed the letter, she wasn't just telling a story. She was sending a message. A message that Meghan's lies would no longer be tolerated. A message that the Queen's final words would not be buried. A message that the monarchy would protect itself, even if it meant destroying Meghan in the process. And that's where we leave Chapter 1. Because the real question isn't why the Queen wrote the letter. We know why now. She wrote it to protect the monarchy. The real question is, what did Meghan do when she realized the Queen had put the truth in writing? The answer to that is where our story takes its first shocking turn. But what came next would push Meghan further than ever before, and no one inside the palace was ready for it. From the very first announcement, Meghan Markle's pregnancies were unlike any other royal pregnancies in history. Traditionally, when a royal woman becomes pregnant, the palace choreographs every step with almost military precision. The timing of the announcement, the photographs, the public appearances, all are managed carefully to project stability, continuity, and tradition. Think back to Kate Middleton's pregnancies. Every detail was carefully revealed, every milestone marked with a sense of occasion. The message was clear. Here is the future of the monarchy, carried proudly and transparently. But with Meghan, it was different, and the differences were impossible to ignore. The first pregnancy announcement came during a royal tour of Australia in October 2018. Meghan and Harry had just landed in Sydney when Kensington Palace issued a statement. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex were expecting their first child in the spring of 2019. At first, the news was met with jubilation. Crowds cheered, newspapers splashed the headlines across their front pages, and Meghan seemed to bask in the glow of anticipation. But almost immediately, questions began to surface. Why had the announcement been made so early, at just 12 weeks? Why did the palace seem unusually vague about the due date? And why did Meghan, in the days and weeks that followed, seem to flaunt her pregnancy in a way no royal before her ever had? Every public appearance became a stage. Meghan cradled her belly incessantly, often in situations where it seemed unnecessary or exaggerated. At charity events, at official receptions, even while simply walking into a building. Her hands were always there, framing her bump for the cameras. Some praised it as a sign of maternal pride, but others saw it as something more calculated, a performance. And that's when the rumors began. Whispers that the bump itself seemed to shift shape, appearing larger one day and smaller the next. Speculation that Meghan's walk and posture didn't align with the physical realities of pregnancy. Conspiracies began to circulate online. Was she wearing a prosthetic bump? Was a surrogate carrying the baby? At first, these whispers lived only in the shadows of internet forums. But as Meghan's pregnancy progressed, the contradictions became harder to ignore. Take, for instance, the day Meghan bent down in heels to pick something up, an action many mothers said would have been almost impossible with a baby bump of her size. Or the time the bump seemed to slip slightly as she walked, caught by the cameras in a way that ignited a firestorm of debate. Were these coincidences? Optical illusions? Or evidence of something more sinister? The palace, as always, refused to comment. But behind the scenes, the speculation was impossible to contain. Staff whispered in corridors. Reporters swapped theories over late-night drinks. Even within the royal household, questions were being asked. And eventually, those questions made their way to the Queen. Now think about this. Elizabeth was not a woman given to gossip. She had lived through too many scandals to take rumors at face value. But Meghan's pregnancy was different. Because if the rumors were true, if Meghan really was deceiving the world about carrying Archie, then the monarchy's very credibility was at stake. And remember, this wasn't just about Meghan. It was about Archie himself. Because Archie wasn't just another royal baby. He was the first mixed-race child born into the Windsor family. His arrival symbolized progress, diversity, and a new chapter in royal history. Millions of people looked to his birth as a sign that the monarchy was evolving. But if his very existence was rooted in deception, if Meghan hadn't carried him at all, then that symbol would collapse into betrayal. And the Queen knew it. Now, let's zoom in on Meghan's behavior during those months. Have you ever noticed how contradictions pile up like bricks until they form a wall? That's what happened here. For example, Meghan claimed she was too heavily pregnant to attend certain royal events, yet appeared sprightly at others, even traveling long distances. She was said to be due in late April, yet her bump size fluctuated wildly across March and April. Some days she appeared nearly ready to give birth. Other days, the bump seemed dramatically smaller. And then there was the secrecy around the birth itself. Unlike Kate, who delivered all 3 of her children at St. Mary's Hospital in London with the world's press waiting outside, Meghan chose to shroud her delivery in mystery. At first, it was suggested she might give birth at Frimley Park Hospital, closer to their home at Frogmore Cottage. Then rumors swirled that she would have a home birth. Ultimately, the palace refused to confirm details, saying simply that the couple wanted privacy. Privacy? That word was a red flag. Because royal births are never private. They are national events. They are milestones in the continuity of the monarchy. And Elizabeth, more than anyone, understood that. So when Meghan vanished from the public eye in April 2019, speculation reached fever pitch. Where was she? Was she really giving birth? Why were details so scarce? And when Archie was finally introduced to the world on May 8, 2019, 2 days after his birth, the doubts only grew stronger. Because here's the strangest part. No one ever saw Meghan leave the hospital. No iconic photograph of her stepping out with Harry and baby in her arms. No official record of the delivery location. Just a staged photo call inside Windsor Castle, with Meghan smiling, Harry beaming, and Archie wrapped in a blanket. It should have been a moment of joy. Instead, it became the centerpiece of conspiracy. And Elizabeth? She was watching it all. She had lived through Diana's turbulent years. She had seen Sarah Ferguson's scandals. She had endured Charles and Camilla's affair, the fallout, the embarrassment. But this was different. This was about lineage. This was about the integrity of the bloodline itself. And that's why she wrote to Meghan. Think about the courage that must have taken. To confront Meghan directly. To risk alienating her grandson Harry. To put words on paper that could never be erased. And Meghan's response? Silence. At least, publicly. But behind closed doors, it must have been devastating. Imagine being called out by the Queen herself. Imagine knowing that the one person whose approval you needed most, the matriarch of the entire institution, saw through you. That she knew. That she had written it down. And yet, Meghan pressed on. The same pattern repeated itself with Lilibet in 2021. Another carefully managed announcement. Another round of secrecy. Another birth shrouded in mystery. And once again, whispers filled the silence. At what point does coincidence become pattern? At what point do contradictions become confession? And at what point does silence become complicity? These are the questions the Queen must have asked herself. And these are the questions Kate Middleton must have asked when she uncovered the letter. Because for Kate, the issue wasn't just about Meghan. It was about the crown her husband would inherit. It was about the monarchy her children would one day represent. And if Meghan's pregnancies were a lie, then the very legitimacy of that future was under threat. Let me put it this way. If Meghan's deception went unchallenged, what would stop others from doing the same? What would stop history from being rewritten, manipulated, twisted into a story that suited whoever shouted the loudest? That's why the letter mattered. That's why it still matters. And that's why Chapter 2 leaves us with this chilling question. If Meghan ignored the Queen's warning once, what would she do when the truth came knocking a second time? Because what came next was not just defiance, it was escalation. And it would pit Meghan against the monarchy in a battle no one could walk away from unscathed. What does it mean to be the silent witness? To stand in the background of history, watching everything, saying nothing, yet knowing more than almost anyone else. That is the role Kate Middleton has played for over a decade in the royal family. From the moment she married Prince William in 2011, Kate stepped into the spotlight not as an individual, but as a symbol. The perfect bride. The perfect duchess. The future queen. And with that role came expectations. Never falter, never speak out of turn, And above all, never reveal the secrets you see behind palace walls. But make no mistake, Kate has seen everything. She was there when Meghan Markle first entered the family. She was there when tensions began to simmer between the brothers, when Meghan clashed with staff, when whispers of deceit about her pregnancies began to ripple through corridors lined with centuries of tradition. Kate saw it all, and she said nothing. At least, not until now. But before we get to her breaking point, let's rewind. Kate's position within the royal family has always been precarious. On the one hand, she is an outsider, born into a middle-class family, raised in the English countryside, and educated at St. Andrews University. On the other hand, she is now the Princess of Wales, destined to be queen consort, the mother of a future king. That duality, outsider turned insider, is what makes her so dangerous to Meghan. Because Kate knows what it means to marry into the firm. She knows the pressure. She knows the scrutiny. But unlike Meghan, she never tried to change the institution. She learned to adapt. And that adaptability gave her power. While Meghan raged against the constraints of royal life, Kate mastered them. She learned when to smile, when to stay silent, when to lean in just enough to appear relatable, but never so far as to risk scandal. She became the monarchy's secret weapon, steady, dependable, unshakable. But behind closed doors, Kate's silence was not passivity. It was calculation. Every word she didn't speak, every truth she didn't reveal, was stored away, waiting for the moment when it would matter most. And when it came to Meghan's pregnancies, Kate's silence was deafening. Remember, Kate was pregnant 3 times herself. She knew what it meant to carry a child under the glare of public scrutiny. She knew the toll it took on the body, the exhaustion, the sickness, the vulnerability. She knew what a real pregnancy looked like, felt like, and demanded. So when Meghan stepped out with a bump that seemed to grow and shrink by the week, when Meghan bent and crouched with the ease of someone who didn't appear heavily pregnant, Kate noticed. She didn't need to say anything. She didn't need to speculate. She could see the contradictions with her own eyes. And yet, she remained silent. Why? Because Kate understood something Meghan never did. In the monarchy, timing is everything. Speaking too soon is as dangerous as speaking too late. And Kate knew that if she revealed her suspicions prematurely, she would be painted as jealous, bitter, or even racist. Meghan had already framed herself as the victim, the outsider bullied by a cold institution. Kate knew the narrative. She knew the press would devour her if she broke ranks. So she waited. She played the long game. And in the process, she became the monarchy's silent witness. Now, let's talk about the infamous moment that symbolized this silent rivalry, the bridesmaid dress incident. During Meghan and Harry's wedding preparations, reports surfaced that Meghan and Kate clashed over Princess Charlotte's dress. Meghan's camp claimed Kate made Meghan cry. Later, Meghan flipped the story in her Oprah interview, insisting it was the other way around, that Kate had made her cry, not the reverse. For the public, it was just another layer of drama. But for Kate, it was something else entirely. It was proof. Proof that Meghan was willing to twist the truth to fit her narrative. Proof that Meghan had no qualms about painting her as the villain to gain sympathy. And proof that silence, for now, was her best weapon. Because here's the thing, silence creates doubt. And doubt, in the world of the monarchy, is lethal. While Meghan spilled her version of events to Oprah, Netflix, and any outlet that would listen, Kate said nothing. Not a word. She didn't correct the record. She didn't defend herself. And in doing so, she allowed Meghan to hang herself with her own contradictions. But when it came to the pregnancies, Kate's silence took on an even darker weight. Because she wasn't just protecting herself, she was protecting the crown. Imagine this. Kate, in her role as William's wife, is privy to palace conversations we can only guess at. She hears whispers from staff, doctors, advisors. She sees documents, schedules, private notes. She knows more than the public will ever know. And she holds it all inside, waiting. And then, after the Queen's passing, she finds the letter. The letter that confirmed everything she had suspected. The letter where Elizabeth herself wrote, in her own hand, that Meghan was lying about her pregnancies. That she had never carried Archie or Lilibet. That the deception had to stop. For Kate, that letter wasn't just confirmation. It was liberation. Because suddenly, her silence had proof. Suddenly, the weight she had carried for years, The knowledge that Meghan's story didn't add up was validated by the one voice no one could dispute, the Queen herself. Can you imagine the relief? The vindication? To know that she hadn't been paranoid, she hadn't been petty, she hadn't been alone? And yet, with that relief came a new burden. What to do with the letter? Destroy it and protect the monarchy from scandal? Or reveal it and protect the monarchy from deception? Either choice carried devastating consequences. And Kate knew it. But here's the thing about Kate. She isn't impulsive. She isn't reckless. She is deliberate. And if she chose to expose the letter, it wasn't out of spite. It was out of strategy. Because Kate knows the monarchy's survival depends on trust. And if Meghan's deception went unchallenged, the monarchy would lose the one thing it could not survive without: credibility. So she exposed it. Quietly, carefully, but enough to ensure the world would know the truth. And in doing so, she stepped out of the role she had played for so long. No longer the silent witness. Now, the whistleblower. But here's the question that haunts this chapter. Why now? Why not during the height of Meghan and Harry's media offensive? Why not during the Oprah interview? Why not when the rumors were at their peak? Because Kate understood timing better than anyone. And she knew that after the Queen's death, the monarchy was vulnerable. Charles was new on the throne. William was stepping into his role as heir. The institution needed protecting more than ever. And Meghan, from across the ocean, still wielded influence. Exposing the letter now was not just about truth. It was about survival. And so, the silent witness became the voice of revelation. But here's the twist. Kate's revelation was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new battle. Because Meghan, when cornered, doesn't retreat. She fights back. And if Kate thought exposing the letter would end the deception, she underestimated just how far Meghan was willing to go. Because what came next was not silence. It was war. And in Chapter 4, we'll uncover just how deep that war ran, and the shocking ways Meghan tried to turn the tables on the monarchy itself. What happens when the people who know the truth are forced into silence? When those closest to the heart of power, the doctors, the aides, the staff, become both witnesses and prisoners of the secrets they serve? That is the question at the center of Meghan Markle's pregnancies. Because let's be honest, a royal pregnancy isn't something that can be faked without help. Think about it. The royal family is surrounded by medical staff, personal aides, bodyguards, press secretaries, and advisors. Every movement is tracked. Every schedule is managed. Every detail is scrutinized. And yet, somehow, Meghan's pregnancy slipped through without the palace ever producing undeniable proof. How? That's where the shadows grow darker. Let's start with the royal doctors. Tradition dictates that royal births are overseen by trusted physicians, men and women who have served the monarchy for years, sometimes decades. When Kate Middleton gave birth to George, Charlotte, and Louis, she was under the care of Sir Marcus Secchel and later Guy Thorpe-Beeston, both highly respected figures in obstetrics. Their involvement was not just medical, it was symbolic. Their presence reassured the public that the births were legitimate, properly documented, and transparent. But with Meghan, everything changed. Instead of following the same protocol, Meghan reportedly chose her own medical team. She bypassed the usual royal doctors, citing privacy and personal preference. And while that may sound harmless on the surface, it broke with centuries of precedent. Why would she take such a risk? Why would she push against tradition so aggressively, knowing the suspicions already swirling around her? Unless, of course, she had something to hide. And here's the thing. Palace doctors were kept at arm's length. They weren't present at Archie's supposed delivery. They weren't seen entering or leaving a hospital. No official statement ever confirmed their involvement. For the first time in modern royal history, the birth of a child in the line of succession occurred without the visible oversight of royal physicians. That alone is shocking. But it gets worse. Because palace aides, the men and women who handle everything from schedules to travel plans, also noticed irregularities. They whispered that Meghan's medical appointments seemed oddly inconsistent. They noticed the secrecy surrounding her due dates. They even observed her body language, her ease of movement, her ability to bend and crouch in ways that seemed inconsistent with late-stage pregnancy. Yet they said nothing. Why? Because aides are bound by ironclad non-disclosure agreements. Their silence is not optional, it is enforced. And when it comes to protecting the monarchy, Silence is survival. Those who break it risk losing their careers, their reputations, even their financial stability. So they kept quiet. They watched. They whispered among themselves. And behind closed doors, they admitted what the Queen herself eventually acknowledged: something was wrong. Now, let's talk about the bodyguards. Bodyguards see everything. They are present in the car rides, the private hallways, the hotel suites. They know when a person is vulnerable, when they are in pain, when they are faking. And Meghan's bodyguards must have noticed the same contradictions everyone else did. The ease with which she bent down, the way her bump appeared to shift in size, the inconsistencies in her schedule. Did they speak up? No, because bodyguards, like aides, are sworn to secrecy. Their job is not to question, but to protect. And protecting Meghan meant protecting her story. Now let's step back and ask the obvious question. If so many people suspected the truth, why didn't anyone blow the whistle? The answer lies in the monarchy itself. The royal family is not just a family, it is an institution. And institutions thrive on silence. Scandals are contained, not exposed. Whispers are buried, not amplified. And anyone who dares to challenge that silence finds themselves ostracized, dismissed, or discredited. So the doctors stayed silent. The aides stayed silent. The bodyguards stayed silent. And in that silence, Meghan's deception thrived. But not everyone was content to bury the truth. Behind the walls of Buckingham Palace, there were those who documented everything. Quietly, discreetly, they kept records. They noted inconsistencies. They filed away evidence. And eventually, those records found their way to Elizabeth. That's how the Queen knew. She didn't rely on rumors. She didn't trust gossip. She listened to the whispers of those she trusted most, staff who had seen the contradictions with their own eyes. And when the evidence became too heavy to ignore, she put her concerns in writing. That letter was not born from speculation. It was born from observation, from testimony, from the careful documentation of insiders who could no longer deny what they saw. And that's why it carried such weight. Because it wasn't just Elizabeth's suspicion, it was Elizabeth's conclusion, drawn from the silent witnesses who surrounded Meghan every day. Now, I want you to imagine something. Imagine being one of those aides. You see things you're not supposed to see. You hear conversations you're not supposed to hear. You know that the woman presenting herself as the glowing royal mother may not be what she seems. And yet, you can do nothing. You cannot speak. You cannot reveal. You carry the secret like a stone in your chest, knowing that history itself is being rewritten in front of your eyes. That is the burden of silence. And that is why the Queen's letter mattered so much. It was not just a message to Meghan. It was a lifeline to those silent witnesses. A way of saying, I see it too. I know. You are not alone. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. Because if the Queen knew, if the staff knew, if even Kate suspected, what about Harry? Surely he must have noticed the same contradictions. Surely he must have seen what others saw. Was he blind to it? Or was he complicit in it? That is the question that will haunt us as we move into the next chapter. Because Harry's role in this deception is not just a side note. It is the heart of the tragedy. Did he knowingly support the lie? Or was he deceived, manipulated by the woman he loved? Either answer is devastating. And either answer changes the story forever. Because what came next was not just Meghan versus the monarchy. It was Meghan and Harry against the Queen herself. And that battle would shake the House of Windsor in ways no one could have predicted. Every story has a center of gravity. The moment when all the rumors, whispers, and suspicions crystallize into something undeniable. For this story, that center is the letter. The Queen's final, private communication to Meghan Markle. Imagine it. An envelope sealed with the crest of the monarch. Cream-colored stationery. The elegant, precise handwriting of a woman who had spent a lifetime drafting formal letters to heads of state and personal notes to family. But this was neither a state letter nor a grandmotherly card. This was something far more dangerous. This was the Queen, breaking her own rule of silence, to call out Meghan Markle. The very existence of the letter is shocking. Elizabeth II was known for never putting scandal into writing. She dealt in glances, in silences, in carefully measured conversations. To commit her thoughts to paper meant that she wanted them preserved. She wanted them remembered. She wanted them undeniable. So what did it say? No one outside the palace may ever know the exact words, but multiple insiders have painted the outline. It was not angry. It was not cruel. It was measured, firm, and deeply unsettling. The Queen was not lashing out. She was documenting. The letter reportedly began with courtesy. Elizabeth acknowledged Meghan's role as Harry's wife, as a member of the family, as the mother of the children who would carry the Windsor bloodline forward. But quickly, the tone shifted. She addressed the rumors. She acknowledged the whispers. And then, she said it plainly. She knew Meghan had not carried Archie. She knew the pregnancy had been staged. And she urged Meghan to stop the deception before it caused irreparable damage, not just to herself, but to the monarchy. Let that sink in for a moment. The Queen of England, the most cautious and private ruler in modern history, openly confronting her granddaughter-in-law with what could only be described as an accusation of fraud. Now, think about the emotional weight of those words. Elizabeth was not merely protecting her family's reputation. She was protecting the continuity of the crown itself. Because in a hereditary monarchy, bloodline is everything. It is the glue that holds the institution together. A lie about birth is not a small scandal. It is an existential threat. And the Queen knew it. According to sources, she wrote with a tone that was almost maternal. She wasn't trying to humiliate Meghan. She was pleading with her, begging her to understand the consequences of her actions. Elizabeth was a woman who had seen her family nearly destroyed by scandals before. Edward VIII's abdication, Charles and Diana's war, Andrew's disgrace. She knew how fragile the monarchy could be. And she knew that if Meghan's deception went unchecked, it could destroy everything she had spent her life protecting. She urged Meghan to consider the future, to think of Harry, to think of the children themselves, who would grow up under the shadow of lies. And most of all, she urged her to stop. Stop pretending. Stop manipulating. Stop risking the credibility of the monarchy. But here's where the letter becomes chilling. Because Elizabeth, for all her tact, was also clear-eyed. She warned Meghan of consequences, not in the sense of punishment, but in the sense of inevitability. Lies, she wrote, have a way of unraveling. The truth, buried, always finds its way to the surface. And when it does, the damage is far worse than if it had been faced honestly from the beginning. Now, imagine being Meghan, reading those words. What would go through your mind? Would you feel fear, shame, anger, or would you feel defiance? Because by all accounts, Meghan did not retreat after receiving the letter. If anything, she doubled down. The bump cradling continued. The secrecy deepened. The narrative expanded. And when Lilibet was born, the pattern repeated. Which raises the chilling possibility that Meghan, far from being cowed by the Queen's words, saw the letter as a challenge, a test of wills. But what about Harry? Did he see the letter? Did the Queen send him one too? Or did Meghan keep it from him, fearing his loyalty to his grandmother might outweigh his loyalty to her? That question may never be answered. But what we do know is that Harry's public stance never wavered. He stood by Meghan. He defended her pregnancies. He attacked the press for their speculation. If he knew of the Queen's letter, he either ignored it or chose to fight it. And so, the letter remained a silent bomb, hidden in drawers, tucked among private papers, waiting until Kate found it. Because when Elizabeth passed away, her personal effects were carefully sorted. Letters, diaries, notes, some destroyed, some preserved. And somewhere in that collection was the letter to Meghan, a letter Kate stumbled upon. A letter that confirmed everything she had long suspected. For Kate, this was the moment of vindication. For years, she had carried the burden of knowing Meghan's story didn't add up. She had endured the humiliation of Meghan painting her as a villain in the press. She had stood silently while Meghan and Harry accused the monarchy of cruelty, of racism, of neglect. And now, here in her hands, was proof. Proof that the Queen herself had seen through Meghan. Proof that the deception was real. Proof that Kate had not been imagining it all. Can you imagine the rush of emotion? Relief. Anger. Responsibility. Because holding that letter wasn't just about vindication, it was about choice. What do you do with the Queen's final secret? Do you keep it hidden and let the lie continue? Or do you reveal it and let the truth finally breathe? Kate, by all accounts, chose the latter, but not without fear. Because exposing the letter was not just about Meghan. It was about shaking the very foundation of the monarchy. Think about the fallout. If Meghan lied, then the world would demand answers. Who carried Archie and Lilibet? Who else knew? Were palace doctors complicit? Was Harry deceived? Or was he part of the lie? Each question is more explosive than the last. And in the middle of it all stands Kate, the one who pulled back the curtain. Now let me ask you this. If you were in Kate's position, would you have revealed it? Would you have risked your own reputation, your husband's crown, your children's future, just to tell the truth? Or would you have stayed silent, buried the letter, and pretended it never existed? That is the impossible choice Kate faced. And it is why this letter is the most dangerous document the monarchy has ever known. Because once the truth is written down, it cannot be denied. And once it is exposed, it cannot be contained. Which brings us to the next chapter of this story. Because Meghan's response to the Queen's letter, whether in words, in actions, or in silence, was more revealing than anything she had said before. And what she did next would not only defy the Queen's warning, but escalate the war between Meghan and the monarchy to a level no one could have imagined. What came next was defiance, and it would light the fuse that set the entire House of Windsor on fire. The Queen had spoken. Her words, meticulously penned and undeniable, now rested in Meghan's hands. The warning was clear. The deception about her pregnancies could no longer continue. And yet, Meghan Markle did not retreat. She did not apologize. She did not even acknowledge the gravity of the Queen's letter publicly. Instead, she chose a path that is both fascinating and terrifying, the path of calculated defiance. To understand Meghan's psychology in this moment, we must first understand the pressure she faced. She had entered the royal family as an outsider, a woman of mixed heritage, American upbringing, and a career in Hollywood. The palace is a fortress built on centuries of tradition, secrecy, and rigid protocol. Every step, every word, every gesture is measured, scrutinized, and dissected. For Meghan, this environment was both a stage and a cage. Her public persona had to be flawless. Every smile, every outfit, every comment made headlines. And yet, behind the cameras, the scrutiny was even more intense. A single misstep could ignite a media firestorm. A single act of rebellion could make her a target. And now, with the Queen's letter in the mix, the stakes could not have been higher. Psychologists who have studied high-pressure environments call this state strategic defiance. It is the calculated decision to double down when cornered, to control the narrative rather than submit to external authority. And Meghan, according to insiders, exhibited every symptom of this. First, there was denial, not just of public accusations, but internal denial. Meghan maintained the narrative that she had experienced 2 legitimate pregnancies, that the children she presented to the world were hers biologically, and that any suggestion otherwise was an attack on her character. Denial in this context serves a dual purpose. It protects the ego, and it preserves the narrative necessary for public perception. But denial alone cannot sustain a deception in the face of evidence. That is where manipulation enters. Meghan reportedly began to carefully orchestrate her interactions with Harry, the staff, and the media. Every conversation was layered with intent. Every appearance was strategically designed. She framed herself as a victim of systemic bias, of relentless media scrutiny, of a royal family that could not understand her unique position. By controlling the story, she deflected attention from the letter, shifting focus from the factual truth to emotional narratives that the public could sympathize with. And this brings us to the most crucial element, the power of narrative. Meghan understood instinctively that perception often outweighs reality. The Queen's letter might have documented her deception, but unless that letter was publicly revealed, no one outside the palace would know. She could continue to craft a narrative in which she was the persecuted outsider, the modern woman challenging a centuries-old institution. And for many, that narrative proved persuasive. Meanwhile, Harry's role cannot be underestimated. Reports indicate that Meghan relied heavily on him as both an ally and a shield. His loyalty provided cover, but it also created tension. Harry, caught between his wife and his grandmother, was forced into a position of complicity. Publicly, he defended Meghan's narrative without question, which lent credibility to her story. Privately, it has been suggested, he struggled to reconcile his love for Meghan with his duty to the monarchy. Yet Meghan's strategy was not purely defensive. She also engaged in calculated offensives. Insiders claim that she expanded her influence over media outlets, ensuring favorable coverage and minimizing investigative reporting into her private life. Interviews, social media posts, and public appearances were all tightly managed, creating a facade that hid the inconsistencies the Queen had so meticulously documented. This is where the psychology becomes even more layered. Meghan's actions suggest a combination of fear, ambition, and resilience. Fear, because the Queen's letter represented an existential threat to her carefully curated identity. Ambition, because she recognized the power she could wield as a member of the global spotlight. And resilience, because instead of crumbling under pressure, she adapted, recalibrated, and executed her strategy with precision. It is also worth noting the emotional manipulation. Meghan's public statements often invoked themes of victimhood, marginalization, and misunderstanding. This narrative served multiple purposes. It elicited public sympathy, diverted attention from the letter, and created a moral framework in which she was always the aggrieved party. By positioning herself as the target of systemic injustice, she made it psychologically difficult for outsiders, including palace staff and family members, to challenge her openly without appearing unsympathetic. But even the most skilled manipulation has cracks, and the Queen's letter created cracks that could not easily be hidden. Those who knew the truth, Kate, trusted staff, and insiders, became increasingly wary. Whispers within the palace grew louder. Doubts began to surface, and while Meghan controlled the narrative externally, internally the tension was palpable. Psychologists describe this as cognitive dissonance, the mental strain experienced when one's actions are incongruent with reality. Meghan's public narrative, reinforced by Harry and the media, was incongruent with what the Queen had documented in private. Managing this dissonance required constant vigilance, continuous narrative reinforcement, and strategic diversion of attention. Which brings us to the most fascinating and controversial aspect, Meghan's response to direct confrontation. Sources suggest that she did not respond to the Queen's letter in the manner Elizabeth might have hoped. There was no acknowledgement, no apology, no attempt to repair the perceived damage. Instead, Meghan reportedly doubled down, maintaining her story with even greater intensity and leveraging her public appearances to solidify her position. Think about that. Imagine receiving a letter from the monarch of the United Kingdom, a personal plea to cease deception, and responding by intensifying the very actions she was warned against. It is audacious. It is risky. And it is deeply telling of Meghan's psychological profile under pressure. But what does this mean for Harry? For Kate? For the monarchy itself? That is where the tension escalates. Meghan's strategic defiance forced everyone around her to make impossible choices. Allies had to decide whether to support her, confront her, or distance themselves. The palace had to navigate a crisis in real time, balancing secrecy, protocol, and public perception. And the Queen's death added another layer of complexity, leaving her letter to exist as both a private record and a dangerous weapon in the hands of those who now controlled it. And here's the cliffhanger that keeps us hooked. Meghan's defiance was only the beginning. Her next moves, public appearances, media statements, and personal actions, would not only test Harry's loyalty, but also challenge the monarchy's ability to maintain authority, preserve reputation, and manage history itself. What she did next would set the stage for a confrontation that no one could ignore, and the fallout would reverberate far beyond the palace walls, shaking the foundations of a centuries-old institution in ways that few could have anticipated. Because while the Queen's letter was meant as a warning, Meghan's response transformed it into the spark that ignited a war no one was prepared to fight. Imagine standing between two worlds. One is your family, your heritage, your duty, the very institution that has defined your life since birth. The other is your heart, your love, your chosen partner, and the life you have tried to carve outside of centuries of expectation. For Prince Harry, this was no abstract dilemma, it was a daily reality. The Queen's letter to Meghan Markle, exposing what she believed to be deception about the pregnancies, landed not only on Meghan's lap, but also on Harry's conscience. Whether he knew its contents immediately or was kept in the dark for a time, the effect on him was profound. Harry was forced to navigate the tension between two loyalties that were, in that moment, fundamentally at odds. Harry's public image had always been a careful balancing act. As the younger son of Charles and Diana, he carried both privilege and expectation. He was the fun prince, the rebel, the one who could bend the rules a little without threatening the monarchy itself. But he also had a deep sense of responsibility, a protective instinct toward his family, particularly toward his grandmother, Elizabeth II, and his brother, William. When Meghan arrived, Harry's life changed in ways that few outsiders could understand. The relationship brought passion, companionship, and purpose, but also a new set of challenges: media scrutiny, palace protocol, and cultural friction. And when the Queen's letter was revealed, the stakes skyrocketed. Let's consider Harry's options in that moment. Option 1. He could confront Meghan, demand the truth, and side with the Queen. This path promised moral clarity, loyalty to the monarchy, and alignment with centuries of tradition. But it would also mean risking the collapse of his marriage and the public humiliation of a woman he loved deeply. Option 2. He could shield Meghan, deny or minimize the letter's implications, and publicly defend her narrative. This path preserved the marital bond, maintained the story of his family life, and allowed him to control the public narrative. But it also meant knowingly participating in deception, betraying his grandmother's trust, and potentially undermining the institution he had sworn to protect. Psychologists would describe Harry's position as moral ambivalence intensified by emotional attachment. Loyalty to family versus loyalty to partner is a conflict that few are prepared to manage, especially under the glare of a global audience. And Harry's actions suggest he chose the latter, protecting Meghan while attempting to navigate the fallout behind closed doors. Yet Harry's strategy was not simply about blind defense. Reports suggest that he engaged in a subtle balancing act, attempting to mediate between Meghan's ambitions and the palace's expectations. He sought to shield her from scrutiny while also preserving his own reputation as a dutiful royal. But every step he took only drew him deeper into a labyrinth of secrecy and moral compromise. One can see the psychological toll. Harry, who had spent much of his life wrestling with public perception, grief over his mother's death, and his own identity within the royal framework, was now contending with the knowledge that his marriage may be built on deception, or at least misrepresentation. He had to reconcile love with truth, desire with duty, and protection with complicity. And yet, publicly, he was unwavering. In interviews, in social media posts, and in public appearances, Harry stood beside Meghan as her staunchest advocate. He attacked media coverage he deemed unfair, defended her character, and painted a picture of a united front against a system that he implied had failed them. The irony, of course, is that the very system he defended, the monarchy, had its own evidence, its own documentation, and its own understanding of what had transpired. The tension between Harry's private knowledge and public actions is what makes this story so compelling. Every appearance, every statement, every social media post carried double meaning. To the public, Harry was the loyal husband defending his wife. To insiders, he was a man navigating impossible choices, weighing love against truth, and trying to maintain some semblance of honor in a situation that left him trapped. But there is another layer to consider: the influence of Meghan herself. Sources indicate that she was aware of Harry's struggles and, in some ways, leveraged them. Her narrative depended on his loyalty, and she reportedly reminded him, directly or indirectly, of the consequences of aligning with the Queen instead of with her. Emotional leverage, subtle persuasion, and the threat of marital collapse created a pressure cooker in which Harry's every decision was influenced by love, fear, and the desire to protect. This is where the story takes a darker turn. Harry's choices, though made out of love, had consequences beyond his personal life. By defending Meghan publicly, he contributed to a narrative that clashed with the documented truth in the Queen's letter. This action, intentional or not, amplified tensions within the palace, strained relationships with family members, and created a new set of public controversies. Each decision became a stepping stone toward escalating conflict. And the irony is stark. Harry's loyalty to Meghan may have been the very thing that undermined his own position. By siding so clearly with his wife, he inadvertently positioned himself in opposition to the institution that defined his identity and heritage. The duality of his situation, love versus duty, truth versus narrative, created a scenario where no choice was without risk. Now, consider the emotional cost. Reports from insiders suggest that Harry struggled with guilt, anxiety, and a profound sense of isolation. He had distanced himself from other family members, navigated an increasingly hostile media environment, and carried the weight of both personal and institutional consequences. And all of this was compounded by the knowledge that the Queen's letter remained a secret weapon, a document that, if revealed, could undo years of careful narrative management. And yet, despite the pressure, Harry continued to defend Meghan. He continued to protect her publicly, to amplify her story, and to suppress the internal knowledge of the Queen's warning. This decision reflects a complex psychological landscape, a combination of romantic loyalty, protective instinct, and perhaps a degree of defiance against what he perceived as an outdated or oppressive system. But here's the cliffhanger. Harry's actions were not without consequence. Every defense of Meghan, every public appearance, every social media post, drew the monarchy closer to a crisis point. And behind closed doors, allies and confidants began to question his judgment. They saw a man torn between worlds, a man whose choices could shape the future of the royal family in ways no one could predict. What would Harry do next? Would he continue to protect Meghan at all costs, or would he confront the truth, risk public exposure, and face the fallout head-on? The answer would determine not only his personal legacy, but the trajectory of the entire monarchy. And what comes next would be a series of events that no one, royal, media, or public, was prepared for. The choices of one man, torn by love and loyalty, would set in motion a chain reaction that could change history forever. Imagine holding the ultimate secret in your hands, the kind of secret that could alter public perception, destabilize relationships, and shake the very foundations of a centuries-old monarchy. For Kate Middleton, that secret was the Queen's final letter to Meghan Markle, a document that exposed a deception so serious it threatened to unravel everything the royal family had worked to protect. And Kate, known for her composure and meticulousness, now carried a responsibility that few outside the palace walls could ever fathom. The first question is obvious. Why Kate? Why was the Queen's trust placed in her hands, rather than in senior advisors or even Harry himself? The answer lies in Kate's unique position. She is both insider and mediator. Her relationship with the Queen was built on years of consistent loyalty, measured discretion, and unshakable judgment. Unlike Harry, whose emotional loyalties complicated decision-making, Kate's reputation as a stabilizing force made her the ideal guardian of sensitive information. Kate's role in this scenario was far from passive. Holding the letter meant more than simply safeguarding a piece of paper. It required strategic thinking, emotional intelligence, and the ability to predict human behavior. The palace, like any institution, operates on layers of protocol, tradition, and unspoken rules. Kate understood all of them, and she leveraged that understanding to navigate a minefield of potential crises. Let's start with her approach to information management. The Queen's letter contained allegations and admonitions, but it was also deeply personal. It reflected Elizabeth II's understanding of Meghan's choices, her disappointment, and her hope that the deception would cease. For Kate, revealing the letter too soon could ignite scandal. Withholding it entirely could be construed as complicity. Balancing transparency with discretion became her primary objective. Sources indicate that Kate employed a careful strategy of containment and selective communication. She shared certain elements with trusted advisors, ensuring that the palace could anticipate Meghan and Harry's possible responses. At the same time, she avoided making any moves that could be perceived as politically motivated. Every action was deliberate, every conversation calculated to maintain her credibility and the stability of the institution. But Kate's influence extended beyond simple information management. She also acted as a psychological anchor for the royal family. Harry and Meghan's increasingly public narrative had caused stress, division, and uncertainty within palace walls. Kate's presence, her calm demeanor, diplomatic skill, and subtle interventions helped temper these tensions. She became a mediator in an invisible war, quietly shaping decisions and guiding conversations without drawing attention to herself. One of the most fascinating aspects of Kate's role is how she wielded soft power. Unlike Meghan, whose strategy relied on public visibility and media narratives, Kate operated behind the scenes. She understood that influence could be exercised quietly. A carefully timed comment, a suggestion offered privately, or even a reassuring smile could shift the course of discussions. In this sense, Kate's approach was almost surgical, precise, controlled, and exceptionally effective. And yet, holding the Queen's letter came with emotional complexity. Kate reportedly felt the weight of responsibility not only to the monarchy, but also to her family, to Harry and Meghan, and to the broader public perception of the royal institution. She had to navigate the delicate balance between loyalty and impartiality, all while under the scrutiny of advisors, courtiers, and an ever-watchful media. One misstep, one leak, and the consequences could be catastrophic. Kate's strategic thinking was also evident in how she anticipated Meghan's reactions. Insiders suggest that she carefully considered every potential move Meghan might make in response to the letter. Would Meghan attempt public damage control? Would she escalate private conflicts with Harry or other family members? Kate planned for multiple scenarios, ensuring that she and the palace could respond swiftly and decisively while maintaining an appearance of stability. Her mastery of timing cannot be overstated. In palace dynamics, when you reveal information is often as important as what you reveal. Kate understood that premature disclosure could trigger public outrage or media frenzy. Delayed disclosure, however, risked losing leverage or allowing the narrative to slip out of control. By carefully managing the flow of information, Kate maintained a strategic advantage over Meghan and Harry, giving the royal family a buffer to respond to potential crises. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Kate's role is her emotional intelligence. She recognized that the Queen's letter was more than just a document. It was a symbol of trust, disappointment, and moral authority. Kate approached it with the reverence it deserved, understanding that mishandling it could not only damage relationships, but also undermine the monarchy's credibility. Her ability to navigate these emotional currents, while simultaneously managing practical considerations, reflects a level of strategic acumen rarely seen in public life. Let's consider a hypothetical scenario that illustrates Kate's finesse. Meghan, aware that the letter exists, could have attempted to pressure Harry into revealing it, or leverage public statements to discredit Kate's influence. Kate, anticipating such moves, reportedly maintained a calm, measured approach. She ensured that Harry had access to guidance without directly confronting Meghan, preserving family unity while protecting the monarchy's interests. Every step was calculated to maintain leverage without igniting confrontation, a delicate dance of influence and restraint. And yet, despite her control, the situation was not without risk. Meghan's unpredictability, Harry's loyalty, and the ever-present media scrutiny created a volatile environment. Kate had to remain vigilant, continuously reassessing the landscape and adapting her strategy. One false move could trigger a cascade of events, unraveling the careful balance she had worked so hard to maintain. The emotional stakes were equally high. Kate was not merely a strategist. She was a human being caught in a web of familial loyalty, moral obligation, and personal responsibility. The letter's existence represented a moral dilemma as much as a political one. She had to weigh the Queen's trust against the potential fallout, her own ethical compass against the expectations of the institution, and her desire for stability against the unpredictable human elements involved. And here's the cliffhanger. Kate's decisions in this period would set in motion events that few could have foreseen. Her ability to hold the Queen's letter, navigate palace politics, and influence the players involved positioned her at the center of a drama that would escalate far beyond anyone's expectations.